It can't be that bad.
Can't be that bad. Okay, dude from Nickelback.
What's up, everybody? I'm Flint Michigan. This is the Punk Rock NBA. Today we're back with episode number 4 of my Most Hated Bands series. As you might guess from the title, this is where I look at bands that people hate a lot and I try to figure out exactly why people hate them so much. Because I think there's always something to be learned there from like a consumer behavior, marketing psychology kind of perspective. Before I do that, I wanted to quickly mention that my podcast is coming in January. I've been working on it for quite a while. It's live now on Apple Podcasts and a couple other platforms. The concept for the show is that I sit down with people who are doing what they love for a living, whether that's a musician or filmmaker or designer or entrepreneur or engineer or whatever, and talk about how they did it with the goal of helping you do the same. So if that sounds interesting, hit the link in the description. The show launches January 6th, and I am stoked. And with that out of the way, let's get into it.
Doesn't everybody hate Nickelback?
First up, the band that you've been waiting for in this series, Nickelback. And just in case you are living under a rock or something and don't know exactly how much people hate this band, let me give you a few examples. For one, there are 55,000 people who signed an online petition a few years back to ban them from the Detroit Lions halftime show. Some cop in Canada threatened to use their music as a punishment for drunk drivers. They've been the butt of millions and millions of jokes like this one.
All you have to do is open the app, type in your ex's name, and anytime you try to look at their profile on Facebook, a Nickelback song starts to play.
Look at this photograph.
Nickelback. That sounds like torture.
And then sometimes people just straight up throw bottles at them when they're on stage. Before I made this video, I kind of thought the hate for Nickelback was sort of the same thing as Imagine Dragons. Like, yeah, their music's pretty bland and corny, but I don't know, were they really that bad? Like, did they do anything that terrible to make people hate them this much? Aren't you guys kind of taking it a little too far? So I looked into it, and actually it turns out there are quite a few pretty good reasons to dislike this band. Well, actually, there's really one main reason. His lyrics. He writes all of them, and you know, I never really bothered to listen to Nickelback lyrics before, because like, why would anybody ever spend their free time reading Nickelback lyrics unless they're making a video like this one? And holy shit, they are fucking awful. Let me give you a couple examples. First of all, from Figured It Out. I like your pants around your feet, and I like the dirt that's on your knees, and I like the way you still say please while you're looking up at me. Pretty lame, kind of misogynist, but it gets way worse than that. For example, this part later in the song. I love your lack of self-respect when you're passed out on the deck. I love my hands around your neck. Now, I don't know what was going through his head when he wrote that, but what I do know is that reading that goes beyond like being funny or just gross or lame to just being like a little bit scary. Or their song called Something in Your Mouth, which is about exactly what you think it is. You're so much cooler when you never pull it out. You look so much cuter with something in your mouth. Okay. And then there's the song SEX, which is just full of gems. But my personal favorite is a song called Everything I Want to Do, which has quite a few amazingly cringe lines, but this one definitely takes the cake. And you might be thinking that this is some sort of like satire or tongue-in-cheek thing, or that he's like playing a character, but nope. Here he makes it clear that this is actually who he is. Sometimes you get into a little fling and you think you know the person, and the next thing you know, you're dating a cokehead who's interwoven into some underground drug world with Hell's Angels and movie stars and models, and you're like, what the fuck am I doing? Nope, can't say I know what you mean there. And then there's this, which I guess isn't really bad or wrong in any way necessarily, but it just kind of makes me think that the fact that he would bring this up 20 some years later kind of makes me think that he's mentally a 16-year-old that spends a lot of time thinking about his own dick. And he also got convicted of driving his Lambo drunk up in Surrey, BC. And I get that people make mistakes and getting one DUI doesn't make you a terrible person, but when you add it to the list of everything else we know about him and the lyrics and all the other stuff, I mean, you drive your Lambo drunk around Surrey, you brag about sucking your own dick, and you write album after album after album of super cringy sex songs, and I think we kind of get the picture of what kind of guy you are.
It can't be that bad.
Can't be that bad. Okay, dude from Nickelback.
But that said, I actually didn't know any of that until I was researching this video. And if I didn't know all that stuff, then I'm gonna say that the majority of people who make some snarky joke about Nickelback on Facebook definitely didn't know that stuff. So why do they hate Nickelback so much? Here's the thing, I don't actually think that they do hate Nickelback at all. I mean, they probably mildly dislike them and find their music kind of boring and irritating, just like I do, but they don't have the same kind of like burning, visceral hatred for Nickelback that all those neckbeards do for Bring Me the Horizon and those poorly lit one-take webcam ramp videos that I love to use. It's not like that. Like, I don't think they actually care this much about Nickelback. I think people just like to say that they hate Nickelback as a way of sort of telling the world, putting on this badge that says, I have good taste in music.
We make love to goats.
In fact, I would be kind of surprised if there's any human on Earth that actually cares enough about Nickelback to truly hate them. I think in reality, the vast majority of the world is like kind of bored and maybe mildly irritated by Nickelback. I don't think people really hate them at all. And even that is beginning to change a little bit. Don't get me wrong, they're definitely still not cool to like, but the tone of the conversation has definitely changed over the years. The biggest example of that would be that Devin fucking Townsend, of all people, like the ultimate hero of like metal gatekeepers, called Chad a genius and featured Chad on his album. That happened. What a time to be alive.
Nickelback featuring Nickelback.
And personally, like I said, I think their music is mostly pretty boring. They have a couple okay songs, but their production is fucking absolutely amazing, especially the drums. Their drum sounds are, in my opinion, absolutely god tier, like the standard for modern rock, and I know there's a lot of producers who feel the same way. And I do have to say, if you haven't seen this cover, like, man, it's fucking really good. Okay, and switching gears to kind of the pop punk emo scene side of things, we have band number 2, Fall Out Boy. Fall Out Boy is one of those bands that's, I would say, pretty much universally loved in the scene. Maybe not like their last couple albums, but other than that, I think pretty much everybody thinks that they are all-time greats and acknowledges their impact on the genre. I mean, I'm sure there's still some angry neckbeard out there that thinks he's the most clever person on earth for calling them
Fall Out gay.
and then turning to his friends for approval like,
Did you hear that? I just called him gay. Can I get a high five? Come on, don't leave me hanging.
but aside from those types who obviously are always gonna hate any band like Fall Out Boy, I think pretty much everybody else likes them. And what's interesting is that I think it's pretty much always been that way.
Freaking love Fall Out Boy, man. Fall Out Boy's like the best band ever.
Yes, they get some hate from like the metal neckbeard types, but they've never really gotten any hate from like within their own scene from what I can remember. And I think I remember them from pretty much the very beginning. And that's interesting to me because usually what happens is once a band kind of becomes the breakout stars of their genre, like Bring Me the Horizon did in metalcore, Suicide Silence did in deathcore, and maybe like All Time Low did a few years later in pop punk, what happens is that they usually start to get a lot of hate from within their own scene. Because as I've talked about in lots of my other videos, some people are just miserable assholes, and when they see other people become successful, it reminds them of their own shortcomings and failures. And instead of taking that as an opportunity to ask themselves like, how could I be better? How can I be successful? How can I change my situation? No, instead of doing that, they try to cut everyone else down and make everyone else just as miserable as they are. But as far as I can remember, that never really happened with Fall Out Boy, and I have a few thoughts as to why that's the case.
Don't send pictures of you or your girlfriend on the internet naked. Trust me from personal experience.
The main thing is that I don't think any of them have ever been like arrogant or obnoxious or loud or douchey in a way that would invite that kind of hatred, which I think is a big part of why people hated Danny Warsnop and by extension Asking Alexandria, or, you know, a young Ollie Sykes, and then by extension hate Bring Me the Horizon. I think both of those guys would agree with me that they were pretty obnoxious when they were younger, and I'm not getting up on my high horse. For sure, if you put me in the public eye when I was 19, I would have embarrassed the living shit out of myself and made everybody hate me. I guarantee you that. But as far as I can recall, nobody in Fall Out Boy has really ever acted like that. And I think a big part of that is because these guys came up in the 90s hardcore scene just like I did. And in hardcore, like, you just really can't act that way or somebody's gonna put you in your place. I remember Pete and Andy from back then. I didn't know them, but we kind of traveled in similar circles. And as far as I can tell, they always acted the same way as when I would go see their bands back in the day. And by the way, if you haven't checked out their old bands, Race Trader and Killtheslavemaster, if you're into like old 90s style metalcore, definitely check them out because those were two of the very fucking best bands of the 90s. So it's interesting to me that even though Pete did a lot of things that might normally get somebody a lot of hate, like hanging out with Paris Hilton and be on the cover of teen magazines and stuff like that, I feel like they kind of got a pass from the scene, like simply because they didn't act like giant assholes. I think really it's like as basic as that. The only time I really remember them getting some shit from the scene was when Pete borrowed some lyrics from a hardcore band called American Nightmare on one of the earlier Fall Out Boy albums. And I'm not making this up, like you can look it up, they settled out of court on this, it happened. And even then, I don't remember anybody in hardcore being like especially angry about it. They were just like, dude, Pete, what are you doing? Like, did you think nobody would notice that you stole fucking American Nightmare lyrics? Like, come on, man.
Times when I'll have somebody over or something, I'll be like, hey, could you go down there and grab the broom out of the closet? And then they open it up.
Now, why am I including them in the most hated band series then? Don't get me wrong, they got a ton of hate and still do, but it's all from those neckbeard types that want to make rant videos about gay, emo, pop punk bands. But to me, that's like a given. If you're a successful pop punk band, neckbeards are gonna hate you because that's just what they do with their free time. So anyway, I guess the lesson here is be a reasonably cool person that doesn't go out of your way to act like a giant asshole, and by and large, people will just kind of let you do your thing. Seems pretty obvious, but I will admit that that's a lesson that I personally didn't learn until I was way, way older than I care to admit.
Bitch, I am the powers that be. I am Christ crucified on the T.
And lastly, King 810. So if you're not familiar, let me just rewind the clock back to, they came out in I think 2008 or 2009. I discovered them on one of these like top 10 metalcore bands that'll make you say OMG YouTube compilation videos or whatever. And they got a ton of attention, almost all negative right out of the gate. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, a couple examples of that would be like this, or this, or this. And that was because of their image, which was like a cartoonishly exaggerated version of the like pissed off, poor, blue collar white guy from the Rust Belt. They like went all in on that as their identity. Like their first album was called Midwest Monsters.
Everyone that I know is in a cage or in a hole.
It's like a lot of like gang and crime kind of imagery. And the thing that really put them on the map was their video for the song Kill 'Em All, which, as you can see, is pretty fucking brutal. I'm not gonna show too much of it here because I don't want to get demonetized, but it's like a collection of clips of people getting fucked up in various violent crimes, some like security camera footage and stuff like that, cut in with footage of guys in the band and their crew carrying guns and stuff. It's super over the top and pretty cringy in a lot of ways, but as somebody who lived in Ohio for 12 years, I lived in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, I get it. I lived in Cincinnati during the time that it was the most dangerous city in the country. Actually, the zip code next to mine was the most dangerous zip code in the entire country when I lived there.
Cincinnati police say Over the Rhine is safe despite 4 homicides in 6 days.
I don't think people from other parts of the country, or certainly not from other parts of the world, I don't think they understand exactly how fucking rough the Midwest is, especially like that Rust Belt part. Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Western Pennsylvania, like Buffalo, Rochester, that whole like Rust Belt, Great Lakes kind of region, it is no fucking joke. And these guys really perfectly captured that just kind of like anger that grows inside you when you live there. I speak from experience on that. Like it just makes you fucking pissed off to be surrounded by this shit every day. If you haven't spent a lot of time there, it's probably kind of hard to understand, but it's just a nasty, gritty fucking place, and these guys are the embodiment of it.
I promised my whole city I wouldn't let the world forget us. That's 100,000 people in me, all with vendettas.
So what made people in the Midwest love these guys is exactly what made everybody else hate them. And I do get why. If you're like some hipster blogger that lives in Brooklyn or Silver Lake or whatever, you're not into some jack dude from Flint, Michigan waving a gun around and acting like, well, the way that these poor, angry white dudes from the Midwest act. I talked about this in my video about Five Finger Death Punch, but I think really what it comes down to is culture clash. And honestly, class conflict. And I'm not trying to take sides or make any kind of political statement, but I have noticed that the kind of people who become like journalists or music writers or reviewers or whatever, they really do not like this kind of aggressive energy, specifically when it's coming from these blue-collar Midwestern types. They'll praise other kinds of like angry, violent, aggressive music all day long, but when that same energy is coming from somebody like King 810, they just are not into it.
Welcome to the truth. God made me in his image. Who the fuck made you?
And to a large extent, I understand why. I mean, it is obnoxious, and brag about carrying a gun and threatening to beat people up, like that shit sucks. And let's be honest, these kind of guys can be pretty scary. I spent a decade living around this stuff. They're pissed off, they will fuck you up. So I get it, it's completely understandable to be turned off by this kind of thing. But that's just the nature of the beast when you choose to take this faction-based approach to marketing your band. Just like in Fallout New Vegas or whatever, if you choose to align yourself with this faction, it means they will love you, but it also means that the other factions will hate you. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious why people hated this band, right? They asked for it. They invited it by taking this faction-based approach to marketing their band. Now, I will say that as ignorant as they might seem, they're not dumb guys. They're smart, and actually their album from 2016, Les Petites Morts, or however you say it, is actually a really, really interesting and very sophisticated album from like a musical perspective. Really never heard anything like it.
I'm going back again. I'm going back again.
It's not really metal, it's not even really heavy at all. Imagine almost like the score from a movie like No Country for Old Men. Definitely worth checking out, even if you're not into the band's image, just from like a purely musical perspective, it's super, super well done, super interesting. All right, guys, that does it for episode number 4 of Most Hated Bands. Let me know in the comments what bands you would like to see me do in the next edition of this. I've got quite a few bands on the list, but I'm sure you guys will help me come up with some that I didn't think of. Also, please check out the podcast if that sounds like something you'd be interested in. There's a link to that in the description below. I also want to thank all my patrons who support me at the true cult level or above. It is because of you guys that I was able to do this podcast. I couldn't do it before because a podcast is a lot of work and I just don't have time to edit it and upload it and all the other stuff that goes into making a podcast. Because of you guys, I was able to hire a producer and editor to help me bring that to life. So thank you very much for that. And also thank you to Deanna Chapman, who is the producer of the podcast. I couldn't do it without her help. I couldn't do it without the help of my patrons. So thank you all very much. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.